Very moving. Yeah, so that music really speaks about a mission and the humanity of an individual called to a mission. I think about the Palm Sunday message and what that means for all of us. And that the unity faith tradition has an interesting way of looking at Palm Sunday and everything in terms of the sacredness of Scripture and those elements that touch us on a deep level. Unity sees it as an interior process, as I mentioned in the meditation, an allegorical way of looking at it, that those conditions and circumstances and stories are allegorical, which means that it doesn't mean that they didn't happen. It means that there is a hidden meaning behind the story. And that each one of us in this room have a hidden meaning behind our life story. And so that when we look at Palm Sunday and the message and the figures and even the palms themselves represent something on a deep level in terms of our own consciousness. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founders of the Unity Movement, were very clear that the spiritual path is about consciousness. It's about letting go and denying the false appearances and then affirming that which is the truth of being in each one of our lives. And that this teaching, this church, this center is dedicated to that truth. And that it is a wonderful, wonderful mission that we are about. And that is the underlying vibration, frequency, intention, power that dwells within your life. That when we turn, just as the music pointed to, when we're going through a dark time, when we're having trials and tribulations, that we have an interior light that we can turn to that is a representation that is represented in this story of Palm Sunday. And so Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of the Unity Movement, really focused on the metaphysical or allegorical meaning behind the images of this story. That the outer story points to an interior process within us. So I would like to work with the story of Palm Sunday from that point of view, from a metaphysical point of view, with the intention of there being a quickening within your own being here today. That this isn't just an old story, that when we look at it metaphysically, it has a 3 or 4 or 5 dimensional quality, that it's not just an old story in a book that we may pull down off the shelf once or twice a year. That the Bible itself is a metaphysical roadmap of the soul, if viewed through the lens of a metaphysical understanding, that is what brings it alive. So unity is a practical teaching, and yet it is a mystical teaching too. It interprets these stories metaphysically, or that which is below or above the physical plane, so that you and I can be fed and nourished spiritually, because we are spiritual beings. We are temporarily in a human body learning certain things, but in the essence of who we are in our eternal ongoing, we are spiritual beings, and that we move back into the spiritual world of higher frequency through our cultivated understanding of what it is and who it is that we are. So, in a way, I'm sharing with you not on the level of personality, but on the level of soul. I am sharing with you on the level of spirit and soul, speaking to the depth of your eternal self right now. And if you feel that that's overly dramatic, oh well. That's the truth as I feel it, not believe it, but as I feel it and know it. It is a ground of being knowing for me about you. Then there is no greater way that I can be of service to you than to see that process unfolding in you. It is an integration that is happening. Excuse me. When my heart opens, tears come. It's an integration process of self and self. Self with a small s and self with a capital S. Self with a small s is our personality that is identified with the world. It is the part of us that gets lonely and afraid and in pain. And the higher self is that which we call upon, which is really our own indwelling Lord that gets us through the shadows and the dark times. So that's what we're giving our attention to here today. Is that good? So when we think about this master teacher, Jesus the Christ, and we call him the Christ because he allowed this Christ energy that is even now in this very room, here. You may not feel it, but it is here. And if there's any good news about these writings and teachings, that's it. It is here. It has not gone away. It has never been absent from our lives. And our process is about allowing it to move through us, just as the master teacher did. There's a distinction that I would like to make between the Master Jesus and the Christ. The Master Jesus was a man who purified himself and made himself a vessel of absolute one-pointedness. The Christ is the divine essence of universal love that resides within each person here, including here. It is our essential nature. So that when we're speaking about these stories, Palm Sunday for instance, it is a process of an entrance into the heart of a spiritual essence. The hosannas, the welcoming of Jesus the Christ into Jerusalem is an outer depiction, an outer story of an interior process. Jerusalem is the heart center, according to the metaphysical teachings of Charles Fillmore, the heart center of the world. And the entrance of the Christ energy is at first heralded and seen as this great celebration. Palm trees, palm branches are put down before him. Metaphysically, palm trees, according to Mr. Fillmore, represent the realization in the physical of unlimited resource of strength. So the conscious mind, the people that are putting down palm branches on the road to welcome this person that is embodying this Christ love, represent the thoughts in consciousness that are acknowledging and recognizing a greater love that is moving through and coming into the heart. And you would think that initially that there would be just this amazing knowing, and there was, in terms of a celebration, but then there is this process of this great love moving into the heart. And tell me if you haven't experienced this yourself. You have an initial inspiration, you have an initial joy of this tremendous presence and power, and then there is, on the heels of that, an activation. Something goes on in the heart that stirs all old patterns that you may have. And there is this process of chemicalization or activation that we go through in order to allow a higher love. And that's what was going on in this story. It's very clear when you look at it metaphysically. There is an activation, and those thoughts, those patterns of belief that have held on to a way of perception, a way of sacrifices, and all of these rituals that those at the time thought were required to approach God. Those all come into question. And the Christ energy moves into the temple of the heart and overturns the tables. Totally disrupts the old way of being so that something else can be born. And the mind, the intellect, both within the hierarchy of the city and of Rome. Rome represents the intellect, the mind that wants to keep a very tense peace, where there really isn't a real peace. Pax Romana is a piece of tension within us. But until we allow this true energy of the actual self to be resident within us, there is this overturning of the tables, a questioning of everything that we thought was a true way of approaching God. It's all an inside job. So we have this story, this beautiful story, and I truly feel that it actually happened, because the principle is, as within, so without, as above, so below. So this whole process is one that is acting out in your life. How? When you meditate, when you have a time of spiritual insight, like I said, there is a time of inspiration, and then there is a time of activation or crucifixion, of crossing out old patterns, old ways of thinking, and then there is a birth. There may be even a time of going into a tomb. And we're getting close to the message of next week, so I won't go there too much. The teachings that the outer depiction represents an inner process. Even the burnt offerings mentioned in this story, the burnt offerings of sacrifices that are made to a God outside of us. You know, the only real thing that needs to be a burnt offering is a concept of God that is one of separation. That needs to be burned up. And we cling to our concept of God as long as we cling to it. And if we have suffering in our lives, usually the suffering is a great awakener. I mean, if you look at your life, everybody in this room, I would imagine, you are here as a result of the container of your concept of God of the past is no longer big enough and expansive enough for the consciousness that you have now. Not making any faith tradition wrong at all. I'm just saying that the teachings are a catalyst for us to expand into a greater heart, a greater knowing. It is truly moving from head to heart. Another story within the teachings that I find very interesting, if looked at metaphysically, are when the disciples are in a boat in the Sea of Galilee and they are sore afraid. The teachings say they are sore afraid because the master is asleep and the waves are getting very, very turbulent and they're thinking that they may perish. The disciples in the boat are a metaphysical symbol of our latent powers within us. That when they are latent and dormant, then when the storms come of life, we feel like we're going to be overwhelmed. But if the master within us is awakened, that master that is a representation of our own Christ nature says, "Peace, be still." And the waves are calmed. This is a metaphor, an allegory of our own internal lives. That through the Christ presence within ourselves, when we call upon it, it awakens and calms the storms of our own emotional life. And the disciples awaken and to behold the actual truth of their being. So, Charles Fillmore stated, when truth comes to one who is in a fixed state of mind, there is a tumult in the temple. Fear that the rites and customs of the church will be interfered with is uppermost in the mind. So this process that we are engaged in is one of significant dedication and rigor and love. Do you love yourself enough? Do I love myself enough to allow this great, wonderful divine pattern to be awakened and revealed as a way of life, not just a belief system, but a way of life to live 24/7 within the consciousness of the heart, to live from the place of divine love, versus saying to myself, well, I just wish that my belief would become a felt knowing. You already are what you're seeking. We all are. We're divine beings. We're spiritual beings. And the process that we are engaged in is cleansing the vessel of self so that it can be filled with this Christ energy, this beautiful magnificence that is the divine gift freely given to all of us. It's very important for us just to love ourselves enough to allow it to have its way within us. I feel that we resist because we don't feel that we're worthy. And that's just old programming of the mind. Right now, you can choose to allow it. Right now. And this is probably what these old, this form of many faith traditions has, the altar call and all of that. We don't go there in unity. We don't need to, because we don't need to be saved from anything other than our own made-up false belief. We already are this good. Always have been, always will be. So the resurrecting power is not just a made-up story. Let me say that again. The resurrecting power is not just a made-up story. Whenever you choose a higher way in your life, it is active. It is bringing you to the next level. The next level of self-realization. So this coming week is what we call Holy Week. The good news is that we're already whole. So we can celebrate it as truly a holy week. I behold that in you. I truly do. Thank you.